So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. When we do these tantric rituals, we always begin with refuge and mind generation, with refuge and bodhicitta, right? These two are very important, refuge and bodhicitta. In the text it says that with the refuge, it protects us from the wrong path, and bodhicitta, it protects us from maybe a self-centered path, So these two are very important. So the object of refuge, the three jewels, traditionally when we think of the Buddha, we think of the person, we think of the historical Buddha, right? But on the other hand, we can also think of the Buddha as the enlightened state, the state in which one has overcome all types of obscurations. So namely the obscuration of mental afflictions and obscuration of knowledge. So this state in which one has overcome, in one which is the state in which one is free from these obscurations, this is Buddhahood, this is Buddha. So like this we can think, but again I think it's always a good thing to associate the Buddha as to the person, right? To the person, to the teacher. So like this, and then Dharma, we can think in terms of Dharma is twofold. The first is the cessation of suffering, as in the third truth of the four truths, and then the path that leads to that cessation, right? So the fourth truth. So these two are the two types of Dharma. And then the Sangha is the support, is the support system. So usually we say the Aryan beings, are someone who has, an Aryan being is a being who has had a direct experience, a direct realization of shunyata, of ultimate nature of phenomena, like this. So, or on the other hand, then normally in practice, then we consider the Sangha, the monastic order, the monastic practitioners. We usually consider them as Sangha, right? So there are different ways of looking at Sangha, different understanding of Sangha. So it is said that the Buddha, it's similar to like a doctor, and then the Dharma is like a medicine, and then the Sangha is like the healthcare giver, something like this, right? So it gives this example. This is a good way of looking at the three jewels. And then it is said that the actual object of refuge is the Dharma. The Dharma is the actual object of refuge. So it says that the Buddha is the one who shows the actual object of refuge, and then Sangha is the one who supports, in achieving that actual object of refuge. So when we take refuge, essentially we are taking refuge in peace itself, because the Dharma, the actual object of refuge is the cessation of all suffering. It is the freedom from all suffering, from all fears. So this is the actual object of refuge. So when we take refuge, essentially we are taking refuge in peace itself, right? As Buddha said that nirvana is ultimate peace, So like this. So these three types of faith, one experiences them, right? One generates those faith in this order, that first one comes across the spiritual guide and sees the qualities of the spiritual guide. So this gives arisal to the first type of faith, and then receiving the teachings and then gaining conviction in his or her teachings. This is the second type of faith, and then not only just sort of thinking about those teachings, but then developing a strong sense of sort of practicing that, and practicing that for a fruition, for an effect, for a goal. And when you set this goal, then this is the third type of faith. So like this, then we have to generate these three types of faith in this manner. When we try to practice the Dharma, when we really try to dedicate ourselves to the practice, to practicing Dharma, to practicing the teachings of the Buddha, one of the biggest hindrance to that is, of course, laziness. It's due to laziness that we cannot really push or dedicate ourselves to the Dharma, right? To the practice. Laziness. Again, there are different types of laziness. Laziness is threefold. The first type of laziness is procrastination. And then the second type of laziness is being absorbed in not so important things or in non-Dharma activities, So this is the second type of laziness. And then the third type of laziness is sort of degrading one's own capacity or one's own potential, and then sort of saying, well, this is too high for me, or this is too deep for me. I cannot practice it like this. This is way, this is too high for me. So, in a sense, sort of degrading one's own capacity, right? And or in a way, this is a form of, I think, low self-esteem. Low self-esteem. So to sort of not letting go of this low self-esteem, but on the contrary, sort of holding on to that. So these three type of laziness, they inhibit our spiritual growth, and they hinder in our Dharma practices. So we have to then be aware that it's not only procrastinating that is laziness, but they are, also being very dedicated for things that would hinder, being dedicated towards things that would also hinder in one's spiritual growth is also a form of laziness. Yeah. And then for the preliminary practices of Tantra is again, the method and the wisdom aspect of the Mahayana path. The two bodhicittas, conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. These two again are indispensable if one wishes to proceed on the tantric path. So these two practices are central, to the path. So these two aspects, the method and the wisdom aspect, or otherwise we use this other word, ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. And because on the foundation, on the base, there are two truths, then therefore on the path, we have, the two aspects, the method and the wisdom aspect, and therefore on the fruition level, then we have the two Buddha bodies, the two kayas, right? Dharmakaya and Rupakaya. So like this, then if you think about it, then this, why we have the two kayas is because there are two methods of the path, and why we have these two aspects of the path is because on the base or on the foundation, there are the two truths. So like this, then this is why there's the need for both these two aspects and the two aspects on the path and also on the fruition as well. So this is why there's a need for these two. So because there are two truths or two existence, the first is the conventional truth or conventional existence, and then ultimate existence, right? So these two, it's very important that one formulates these two, one sees existence in these two terms. That's very important. And even though we call this the two truths are inseparable. They are not of two separate, they don't have separate entities. They are not to be understood as two distinctive aspects, but rather it is only from the viewpoint of the mind or the knower or of our knowledge that there are these two distinctions. So, conventionally speaking, no one can deny the fact that we are all gathered in this room, and we are having this discussion, or there's one man who is doing most of the talking here anyhow, right? So like this, we cannot deny that, right? So this is what we call conventional reality, because we can all agree on that, right? So conventional reality, and then yet this person who is talking is a person. Yes, we can all accept that, but if you were to ask this question, well, where is this person? What is the person? Can you pinpoint to the person? If you were to sort of analyze like this, then you won't really be able to pinpoint to the person. You cannot come to any conclusion where you will say, aha, this is it. This is the person who is doing the talking, right? If you simply have to merely accept that there's a person who is talking right now, and that's it. But if you go beyond that, then you won't find the person who is talking. So this is what we say, what we call emptiness, that it is empty of an inherent person. The person who is talking the person himself lacks this intrinsic person who is talking, So like this, then, we have to sort of understand emptiness. And there's this also one example that to a person who is suffering from a form of jaundice, to who things appear as yellowish. So if the person looks at, let's say, a white conch shell, the person would see a yellow conch shell, right? A yellow conch shell. And to this person, this yellow conch shell would seem so real, would seem so real. Yet his perception, the white conch shell is not separate from his perception. What he is actually seeing right now, what he perceives to be a yellow conch shell, is in fact a white conch shell, right? So they are not two distinctive things, but they are one in that sense. So likewise, then these two truths are also understood in the same terms. So when you look and if you listen to the sutras that talk about the bodhisattvas and how they had practiced compassion, love and compassion and kindness towards others, and how they generated bodhicitta, then this is, I think, very inspiring for the listener, So this, I think, is very good. And for example, Manjushri, the way he generated his bodhicitta was, I think, that he also made this vow that until all sentient beings attain Buddhahood, that he wants to, that he also would abide in samsara and help them, to help them to proceed on the path, and especially help them in the realization of the realization of emptiness, of suchness. So these bodhisattvas, even though they are all equal in the way that they have generated bodhicitta, but each of them, there's a special aspect or a special way that in which they generated their bodhicitta. So like this, I think this can be inspiring. So with this kind of attitude, then we have to try to generate these two bodhicittas. And when it comes to practicing conventional bodhicitta, then sometimes I think it can be overwhelming, when we have to think about the suffering of others, suffering of others. So, and having this altruistic intention, it doesn't mean that one has to neglect oneself or one has to overcome the love of oneself, right? Love for oneself. So it does not mean that, because sometimes there is this question that thinking about other sufferings is overwhelming, can be overwhelming, and then one becomes overwhelmed and sort of becomes hopeless, loses hope and sort of in a way also loses joy. Like this, people, I think sometimes they feel like this, right? When this happens, then it is important that when we try to generate, bodhicitta, we do so always with an appreciation of ourselves. This is very important, to not sort of blame oneself, to not see oneself in a negative way, to not self-neglect. This is important, because if you look like in the foundation of all excellence and also the three principal aspects of the path, when so for example in the three principal aspects of the path, like with verse number 4, where it talks about how this human form is has this freedom and endowments like this. I think this is the point where we have to develop some form of appreciation of ourselves, and this is, I think, very important. That otherwise, if one blames oneself for all the bad, for all the negativities, then one really loses the joy to live. And I think this is not good. If one loses joy, then it would be very difficult to develop unconditional love and loving kindness towards others, because you are coming from a place of self-loathing and self-negligence and self-blaming, and from that place, then I think it would be quite difficult for any positivity, for a positive outcome. So when we think of from the path that is common to the person of small capacity and middling capacity, when we are thinking of precious human rebirth, I think this is the point where if we have to develop a sense of appreciation and sort of recognizing how fortunate we are, how fortunate we are having met the Dharma, having taken this human existence, and having the mental faculty, having the intelligence, and having a form of empathy, how we can use our intelligence to empathize with other sentient beings. So we have to really think about all of these attributes that we have as human beings, and then develop a strong sense of appreciation, and then build, and then from this place, then I think it would be better to then sort of contemplate about others' sufferings, and then try to generate loving kindness towards them also, right? So this, I think, is very important when we try to develop compassion. When we try to develop this unconditional compassion towards others, what should we do when we come across difficult people? What do we do when we come across difficult people? Then this is a very good question, and of course that's very challenging. That's understandable. One might lose one's cool when faced with that situation, right? But then we have to, on the other hand, we have to think. When we, even this word, difficult person, we have to really be careful how we sort of label things. How we label things. That's very important. We also have to then, when faced with that situation, when in that circumstance, then you have to, I think, do some analysis. You have to sort of analyze, and you have to think that this person is difficult because he or she is being influenced by these negative emotions, these negative mental emotions, right? These afflictive emotions. So we have to think like this and not see the person as negative, but rather the person is being influenced by negative emotions. And negative emotions are purely a mental state. They are not an inherent quality of the person. I think this is very important to separate the person from his or her mental emotions, to separate the persons from the person's actions. This is important, to trying to separate that. Of course, that's not easy, but we must try. Nevertheless, we should try and give that approach a chance and see where that takes us, right? So instead of sort of labeling the person as being 100% negative, then I think if that's the approach that one takes, then it would be very difficult to, for example, to reconcile with a person if your sort of philosophy, or if your approach is that, if your statement is always going to be, this is a bad person, then how can you reconcile with a person, right? So like this, then we have to be skillful, and we sort of have to analyze and sort of dissect things into this kind of way. If you can try to separate the person from the actions, then I think it makes it easier to sort of forgive them. So forgiveness is again very important. Yeah. And when sort of being facing difficulties, then it's important to not lose hope. This is important, because if we lose hope, then we don't have anything. We have lost everything, right? So no matter how difficult the circumstance is, you always have to think that this difficult situation is impermanent. It is impermanent. It's only temporary. So always to remind oneself that, just like all situations, good or bad, positive or negative, they're like the river. They're just passing through. They're just passing through. So we have to think like this, and of course, when it gets really unbearable, then I think thinking sort of getting out of our bodies and sort of like looking into multiple lives, seeing our past lives, the present life, and the future lives. If you could like zoom out of your body, if you could do that, then I think all the problems that you're facing right now in this life, it's just like a little millisecond, it's just like a millisecond. So like this, I think this kind of approach, it helps in not losing hope, and it helps in also, I think, developing compassion. It also helps in developing and solidifying bodhicitta, so to not lose hope. So like this, I think then we have to use any method we know or we have heard of so as to not lose hope and not lose joy for practicing the Dharma, So this is very important. So like this. I'm just wondering, if we start the question answer session now, how many questions are we expecting? So could you please raise your hands, those of you who might have questions? Okay, we have 1, 2. We have 2.
And second floor, if you guys have a question, can Lillian, you help to facilitate and let me know?
Okay, so maybe we can begin with the questions now, and then I think more questions will. Yeah.
Okay. Melvin, you had a question yesterday, or yesterday he choked from yesterday.
Rinpoche, Thank you for coming and sharing with us your teachings. I'd like to understand a little bit with regards to this query that I have. Someone has told me that above the law of karma, actually there's a law of forgiveness, of compassion. Have you heard of this? That's right. And in using this law, instead of where we talk about compassion, we talk about motivation. Is a law, in a sense, a better use, in a sense that law is more absolute, and using that law of compassion, law of forgiveness, in practicing the higher scope, or the motivation would be a better word for this, in a sense. It may just be a word play, but I find that when you take a law, it becomes an easier way because there's a clearer line in practicing, especially in the higher scope in that way.
Oh. It's a very interesting term, the law of karma. In Tibetan, I'm not aware that we have a corresponding term like that. I don't think we have the law of karma in Tibetan, but it's really interesting. I mean, we have le jumde, we say, le is karma, and ju and de means cause and effect. So cause and effect of karma, something like this. But we don't have this word, the law of karma, But I think, nevertheless, in English, this term is used, right? The law of karma, or the law, maybe it comes from the law of causality. I think in science, I think you have this term, the law of causality, and then when you combine that with karma, then it becomes the law of karma, right? Maybe it became like that. But anyhow, in Tibetan, we don't use the word the law. We don't have that. We just have karma, cause and effect, karma and the cause and effect. So karma and then compassion, right? So was your question put in the way that for a motivational factor, is karma better or compassion better? This was not the question, right? Oh, okay. Please, the mic.
Oh, sorry. So my question is actually indicating, is using the term motivation better, or the law being better in that sense?
Yes, definitely motivation. Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Oh, yes. Well, I think, when we say the law, then it almost seems like it is sort of being enforced upon us. It's not really coming out of our volition. It's not coming from within ourselves. That it almost sort of takes the joy out of it, because it is the law, right? One must follow the rules or something like that. Whereas motivation is something that is up to you. It's your choice. That it's our choice of whether we want to be on the path or not, or it's our choice whether we want to be on the path to full enlightenment or not. It's really our choice, and we have to make that decision based on how we feel of ourselves, of our situation, and how we feel about other situations. So it has to be based on our experience. So I think it's more like a rationalist approach, rather than this sort of, it is because of God's will. If you have the law, then it almost becomes like, because we have to generate bodhicitta, because this was the intent of the Buddha. You know, if you use that approach, then it is quite similar to saying, because it's God's will. You know, what's the difference? You just replace God with Buddha, right? So I think, yes, motivation is a much more powerful word. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Rinpoche, thank you for the teaching. My question is more related to yesterday's teaching about if a tantric practitioner break his samaya and fall to the Varsha hell. So let's say if this tantric practitioner start to have dementia and loss of memory, so is there a support system that can help this person in order not to break his samaya, be it himself or we can help him? Thank you.
I think if one has dementia, then I think one is then exempt from all the root downfalls and is it the secondary, what is the word, infraction? The root downfall and then the root downfalls and then infractions and the secondary infractions. Then one is exempt from all of those, I think. Yeah. So in other words, one cannot commit a downfall if one has dementia. Yeah. But this case is still difficult, you know. How is the mindset of a person who has dementia, you know? Also, you know, if you go into really, I think, like a severe form of dementia, then it's like they have a mind, but what is the quality of life, you know? Can they have the whole spectrum of feelings, right? So these are difficult questions, but anyhow, I think, you know, as explained in the Dulva, you know, the Vinaya Pitaka, you know, as explained in the Vinaya Pitaka, for example, if a bhikshu, you know, a fully ordained monk, sort of loses his mind, you know. So we say loses his mind, meaning like he sort of becomes mad or crazy, right? Or clinically crazy, if he is deemed as such, then whatever he does, whatever acts he commit, he even if he does something that would generally would constitute a downfall, for that person it would be an exception, right? So this is clearly mentioned in the Vinaya Pitaka. So I was thinking also for someone who has dementia, whose mind is not considered like natural anymore, you know, that's from different, like from how generally how people act or think, you know, then I think those persons also are exempt from committing downfalls and infractions. Yeah. But I think, you know, still like reciting mantras to the person like that, I think it would be beneficial, you know, because there is a mind, they are still somehow conscious to the surroundings, even though they might not recognize a certain person or like that, but still I think we can, you know, recite mantras, etc., like this, and that would have a positive effect on their minds. Yes.
Rinpoche, thank you for the teachings. My question is with regard to what you mentioned yesterday about in Buddhism, we understand that our lives are beginningless. Yeah. So from that, I would say that our self-grasping ignorance is beginningless, and yet there is an end to it. So my question is, how do you really prove that this life, our life, or self-grasping ignorance is beginningless? What's the line of reasoning? How do we prove that? And we do know there's end. Usually when something has an end, there's a beginning, you see. So yet there's a beginningless, and yet yes, there's an end. So that's my question. Thanks.
This beginningless. Yes, it is true that just as our lives are beginningless, so is our self-grasping mind. That if you look at the continuum, there is no beginning of that continuum. That is so true. Yet we say self-grasping has an end, but the continuum of life, does that have an end? I think the answer is no, right? So then what is the difference? A classic way of answering that question would be that self-grasping has an end because it is erroneous in its grasping, right? But mind itself has no end because it can also be accompanied by virtuous thoughts or virtuous minds or virtuous consciousness. So mind itself has no end, but all aspects of the mind that are erroneous in their grasping, in their mode of apprehension, have ends because of that reasoning, because this is their nature, because they can simply be overcome, they can be overcome. They can be, because there is an antidote to that mode of apprehension, therefore that mode of apprehension can come to a cease, right? This is the reasoning that is used. But one cannot apply the same reasoning to mind itself because it has no antidote. Because if it does, it has to come from one of its own aspects. And an aspect of the mind cannot be an antidote to the mind itself. That would be self-conflicting, right? So we use this reasoning. But still, I think it's very interesting. On the one hand, like especially in the sutra side, in the sutra teachings, in the sutra commentaries, there's always this explanation like this, that the self-grasping mind has an end, right? It is an object of abandonment. But then, if you go to higher Tantra, then I'm not so sure. I don't know whether in there it mentions explicitly that these afflictive emotions also have an end. I don't know if it is mentioned like this or if it is explained like this, but maybe in the higher tantras, then it could be that that aspect of anger may have an end, but anger itself, its continuum, has no end, So it could be like that. So it's purely from the viewpoint of having an angry aspect that may have an end, but the continuum of anger itself could still be endless, right? So I don't know, because in the higher Tantra it mentions that these, like the 5 delusions, the 5 afflictive emotions, they then sort of turn into the 5 wisdoms, the 5 primordial knowledges, right? So when you come across those kind of teachings, those statements, then I think it is interesting, you know. It is, there are always two options you can pick, you know. Either you can go with the sutra explanation or with the tantric explanation. So whichever fits, you know, whichever makes more sense, I guess you can choose that. And this is, I think, this is like the beauty of the Dharma, is that you can always, everything is open to interpretation, right? Nothing is so rigid, right? There are always different levels of explanation according to, of course, the level of, according to the mental disposition of us, you know, of ourselves, of the student, you know. So like this, then I think it's very interesting. But this kind of debate, in a way, is interesting, but in a way, sometimes I feel it's a little pointless, you know. So what if it has an end, or if we can interpret it like this or like that way? There are so many different options, but the more important thing is that we have to overcome those negative emotions, and we have to utilize our positive side, you know. The mind is immeasurable. The mind is limitless, and it contains within its stream positive and negative, right? And whether those negative aspect and the positive aspect, whether they share the same continuum or not, is not such a big issue. The more important thing is that how can we use and utilize our positive side of our minds in order to sort of overcome the negative aspect, you know. So this is, I think, very important, very important. But still, this kind of sort of analyzing is very helpful to do just that, you know, that our analysis, whatever summary or conclusion that we come at, we should try to link that to our practice, you know. How can we use that to develop our practice, you know, that we should not just say, this is the conclusion, I stop, you know. You don't stop. You don't stop. You use that conclusion in order to, and you use that, and you try to bring that onto the path, you know. You try to bring that so that one can use that as an antidote to fear, to, you know, suffering, to mental delusions that we have. So we have to do it like this. Why I'm saying that is that I don't want to give the wrong impression that this is what the point of our discussion is about, is to come up with a solution or to come up to a conclusion, like a philosophical point, and say, this is the philosophical point, you know. If you say it like this, then there is a danger that we might sort of become attached, you know, attached to our view. And being, and if one becomes attached to one's view, then as it is mentioned by Nagarjuna, if one becomes attached to one's view of emptiness, then there really is no hope, right? Because emptiness is, the purpose of emptiness is to overcome attachment, and if you become attached to your view of emptiness, then there really is no hope, right? So like this, then it's important that it's not about whether my view or your view is correct or one is incorrect. That's not so important. It's the more important thing is how do we apply our views and our sort of like this conclusive thoughts, how do we apply that onto our practice, and what benefit do I get from that, you know? So this is very important, and I just wanted to remind ourselves of that.
Thank you very much for the wonderful teachings. I have a question. We all have our individual mind stream that has been existing since beginningless time. When we attain full enlightenment and we merge our minds with the Dharmakaya mind of the Buddha, do we still retain our individual mind streams? Do those continue once you're fully enlightened?
This is very, very interesting. I think, if I'm not wrong, there's this statement somewhere that, sentient beings, all sentient beings, when they become the Buddhas, then they are of the same nature, right? Like this. On the other hand, this thinking like all sentient beings have their own individual mind streams, but when they become enlightened, when they become Buddhas, then their mind streams become one, right? This thinking, in some way, I think it is similar to how some of some branches of the Hindu philosophical systems think, that there is this talk of an individual self, and when you are liberated, then you all become one, one with the self, right? And they have a term, something, I don't know, something like that was something, This is alluding to the nature, the ultimate nature. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So, for example, we have Buddha Shakyamuni, we have Buddha Shakyamuni, and then how about, if we have a different Buddha, then for example, so according to the tantric path, then of course Manjushri would also be considered a Buddha, right? So then the Manjushri's mind stream and Buddha Shakyamuni's mind stream are one, you would say, if you follow like this kind of thinking. Then what does that mean? What does that mean? And if you go back to this concept of Dharmakaya, it is true that there is a concept of Dharmakaya, but then wouldn't it be possible to have like individual Dharmakayas, right? Why wouldn't that be possible? Why? And if you ask this question, if you ask, well, it is because it is emptiness, it is ultimate nature. If you explain it like that, then you would have to say that the emptiness of this table and the emptiness of that table are inseparable, that they are one, right? But then that would make no sense, because within emptiness, we talk of emptiness of the person and emptiness of phenomena, right? Then there would be no need for that distinction, because they are both emptiness and therefore one, right? So even that, I think, with that argument, then I think the mind, just as sentient beings have also individual mind streams, I think enlightened beings would also have like their respective mind streams. I would like to think like that, but of course I cannot say this from experience, right? But I can only sort of, like with it's just a theory. It's just a theory. So I would like to think like that, because I find it quite difficult, why that should be the case, why that first we are all individual beings, and then when we become Buddhas, we all become one, right? Excuse me? Yes, please? Oh, think? Yes, it would be, yes, we have, Buddhas can talk to each other, right? Yes, Buddhas can probably greet each other, and yes, So this should be possible. Yes, yes. So because sometimes I think it's really difficult to explain how it is in enlightened state, because there is no point of reference. Because right now, the only point of reference I have is my mind, and I can only sort of go from there. And then when we are asking these questions, like how is it when you become a Buddha, then it is really difficult to really answer, to give a real, to answer out of conviction, right? But maybe perhaps only by using this kind of logics, like we used with the emptiness of the person and the emptiness of phenomena, how we would make a distinction between those two emptiness, even though they are both equally emptiness, even though they are both equally ultimate nature, right? That they are only, we say that they are only distinct from the viewpoint of the object of emptiness, not from their nature. But if you were to say that about, let's say, about two Buddhas, because if one says that when sentient beings become Buddhas, they all become one, then you can never say two Buddhas. Buddha is only one, right? It's only one. And recently I saw this like video on some social networking site, and it was quite funny. There was this Hindu guru, and he was talking of infinite infinities, and this was really funny. And he was saying, he was being interviewed, and he was saying, this concept of infinity within one God is a mentally retarded theory. He was I think he was not very politically correct, but the way he said it was so funny, and he said there are infinite infinities, infinite infinities. So that I thought was quite nice, just the way he said it, right? So anyhow, that's just I don't know, something not so related to the question or to the matter at hand. And Dharmakaya, I think usually maybe I can say it like this, that within Dharmakaya, then there are two kayas, right? There are two kayas. One is Jnana Kaya and the other is Swabhava Kaya, right? So Swabhava Kaya and Jnana Kaya. So Jnana Kaya refers to the omniscient mind, and Swabhava Kaya is the ultimate nature of that omniscient mind, right? So both of these two are considered Dharmakaya. But many times when we use the Dharmakaya, usually we are using it in the context of Swabhavakaya, which is emptiness of omniscient mind. So we have to be very careful, because when we say, like our future Dharmakaya, this is our objective Dharmakaya, then because it is our objective, therefore it doesn't exist in the present, right? So what it means is that this Dharmakaya does not exist out there, but we have that potential within ourselves that we can indeed achieve that. And this potential is called the Buddha nature, So in other words, the emptiness, the ultimate nature of our present mind is Buddha nature. And when that potential is fully realized, then we just call it Dharmakaya or Swabhavakaya. So these two terms, Tadakatagarbha, which is Buddha nature, right? Buddha essence, Tadakatagarbha, and Swabhavakaya, or in that context, Dharmakaya, they're just two different states in which one is free from all obscurations and one is not free from obscurations, right? So it just refers to those two states, and they are not two distinctively separate things, but it is only a matter of whether one is free from, if one's mind is not free from obscurations, then the ultimate nature of that mind is simply called Buddha nature, Tadakatagarbha, and when one's mind is freed from all obscurations, then the ultimate nature of that mind, the freed mind, the omniscient mind, is simply called Dharmakarya. So like this, yeah. So just for some technical reasons, then like Tadakatagarbha, Buddha nature, is explained in different ways. So sometimes, so this has to do with how there are 4 branches of Tibetan Buddhist traditions, and each of these branch, they might have some little there might be minor differences in explaining some philosophical points, and Tadakatagarbha, Buddha nature, is one of those where different schools, different traditions might express that differently. So one should not be sort of surprised when one is given a different explanation. So one should be in a way sort of prepared, prepared for different interpretations. But at least from this, from a Gelugpa point of view, then Dharmakaya or also, Tadakatagarbha, they are always explained from the viewpoint of the ultimate nature of the mind. So the mind that is freed is, the ultimate nature of the mind that is freed is Dharmakaya, and the ultimate nature of the mind that is not freed is Tadakatagarbha, right? And then in the other schools, some other schools might explain Buddha nature as somewhat more positive, and not purely from the viewpoint of ultimate nature, but also from the luminous quality state of the mind, right? So there is also that explanation as well. Either way, both of these modes of explaining the Buddha nature the point is the same. The goal is the same: is to develop this recognition that we can become Buddhas. It is to develop this inspiration. It is to become inspired, to free our minds of all those afflictive emotions, right? This is the point of why we talk of Buddha nature in the first place. So irrespective of the different ways of explaining what that is, the point is still the same, right? So just wanted to remind us of that. Okay.
Reberty, there's questions from the second floor.
Oh.
There are 2 questions and 1 question from here. So it's all related to Varsha hell. So I'll just ask all together. So from the second floor, a devotee is asking, Rinpoche, how do we know if we are dropping into Varsha hell? Are there any signs or symptoms that we are going to go there? And the second question from the devotee is Varsha hell and the normal hell the same? What are the differences?
Oh.
Yeah, and then there is this question that is also related. How can one be freed from Varsha hell if we go into there? And how long can we come out from the hell?
I think it is ironic that the questions of Varsha hells are coming from the upper floor. Actually, it has to come from the basement, So all future questions related to Varsha hell from the basement. But these questions, can you please go with the first?
The first one is, how do we know if we are dropping into Varsha hell?
How do we know?
Yeah, are there any signs and symptoms?
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. To cut a long answer short, I don't know. Okay, then the second one.
The second question is Vajra hell and the normal hell the same? Are there any differences between the hells?
It's a hell, but with the prefix Vajra. Is it? Okay. It's not only a hell, but it's also a Vajra hell. I'm so sorry because I know nothing of Vajra hells, you know. And then the third question?
The third question is, if one goes into the Vajra hell, how can we be freed from the hell? And how long can we come out of the hell? How long can we come out? It sounds like,
How long can we
Yeah.
before we can come?
I think it
Or
sounds
how
like
long does it
if we
take?
come out and then
Oh.
if like we take leave and take a break and we have to go back.
Oh, these questions related with Vajra hell is this, I think, like being, you know, the next thing, the next closest thing to actually being in a real Vajra hell is being asked questions about Vajra hell. I think, you know. so these questions, they are really difficult to answer, you know. But I think maybe I can answer it like this, but first, please. I think, you know, once we are in any form of hell, I think it's almost too late, right? So the most important thing is not to make, you know, mistakes in the present moment, right? Try not to make mistakes in the present moment, and especially, you know, refraining from non-virtuous action. This is the main thing. If one can refrain from that, then one does not need to worry about whether they might take rebirth in the lower realms or not, you know. So always to refrain from negative acts and then, you know, try to commit virtuous actions as much as possible. So like this, then I think we can then avoid taking rebirth in the hell realms. Yeah. Okay, so we stop for today.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So we'll do dedication.